Cool. Well, good morning, everybody. It is a nice morning here in Denver. Today, I wanted to go over some of my animations and how I'm handling some of the stuff with ALS. I've been getting some questions on Instagram about some of the stuff that I was posting, and I really wanted to answer. It's just sometimes it might be easier to show instead of typing words, especially with some of this stuff. So I kind of wanted to take a look at how I'm handling some of this stuff, and this isn't necessarily a tutorial because there's way good tutorials on how to do this. This is just more like what it looks like and kind of what I did to integrate some of it. So the first thing, let's go ahead and play a little bit and see some of these. So the first thing to kind of take note of is the walking and the running. So these specifically are handled by ALS. So these aren't animations that I've used or integrated. These are actually pretty default with ALS. When it starts to get custom is when we do these overlay states. So when she draws her katana, now there's sort of a animation sitting on top of another animation. So this walk is sitting on top of the walk that we just saw, and there's modifiers essentially that are telling this character how much of the original animation do we want and how much of the new sort of custom animation do we want. And so let's take a look at what that kind of looks like. So we'll go into the folder. So there's a few different things going on. The first thing is this blueprint right here. This is handling a lot. This blueprint is growing and growing and growing, as well as, let's make sure we get the base ALS. Okay, so basically there are these 3 different blueprints that are doing most of the work in terms of animations and controls. This one right here is basically handling a lot of the controls sitting over on top of this character blueprint. And then this character blueprint is a child of this ALS base character. And the ALS base character is doing most of this stuff is inventory, so it's going to look a little bit more confusing than what it will look like by default for most people starting with ALS. But the base character is mostly handling a lot of overlay and state machine stuff. So I think probably the best way to describe some of the animation stuff that I'm doing is really centered around state machines. And those state machines are, let me find those. I think actually if I go into here and type in state, we can find some of those state machines. So oh, that's or is that in the, oh, oops, there's 4. I forgot. I also need to find the animation blueprint. So there's four. There's four different major and blend space. Okay, so there's a lot. I'm sorry. I'm realizing the more and more I go through that there's a good grip of stuff going on. There's also the blend space. These blend spaces can be really useful for smooth transitioning between locomotion stuff. So as we see here, there's sort of this matrix grid of different animations. And if we look at this a little closer, each one of these little spots is an actual animation. And as we move through these values, it blends between the different animation states. And this is incredibly helpful for that blending between specifically locomotion stuff. I haven't really used a blend space for like fight animations or anything. I am triggering those through animation montages. But specifically for locomotion stuff, having a blend space really helps with the smoothness of the transitions between those locomotion animations. And I can go ahead and show where that's integrated. And that is integrated in a specific spot on our state machine. So let me find the state machine because I realize it's in the animation blueprint, not the base character blueprint, specifically the animation blueprint. And this is where you're going to be handling your IK. This is where you're going to be handling sort of the state machines and the overlays. So this animation blueprint really is what's handling a lot of, well, I guess specifically the animations. But let's dive a little bit deeper and get a grasp on what's going on. Here, this is the basic. Well, it's not basic, it's really advanced actually, but this is a really good way to think of a state machine. You can go from each one of these different states. So you've got to move forward, and from move forward, you can either go to move left or move right. And from move right, you can either go to move forward or right backwards, and so on and so forth. And all these little arrows are showing these connections that can be made. So basically points that you can go from in terms of animations. And the state machine is kind of, I really like the state machines in blueprints because it's very visual. Of course, you can write state machines in C++ or C# or whatever coding language. I just actually really like being able to see it. I think visually that helps me understand how the state machine is working. So in our, let's go to our overlay state. Okay, so this is kind of, right now there's really not a lot that's being used at this point in time. I set this up so that I can use these later, but right now there's just default. There's just feminine for when Dawn goes into the subconscious world, and then there's just katana. What's really cool about this system is later on down the road, if things go well, I can always add rifles and pistols and bows, and this setup is ready for that, which is really exciting. But currently, I'm just going from default to katana, and the programming behind this are controls that I've kind of chosen to trigger these events. I'm mostly using enumerators. So when the enumerator is katana, we can enter that transition. But I think really what I wanted to show specifically is what's happening in katana. So in katana, we are, rather than having a set of montages, we're using that animation, the blend space. And we've got these two variables, direction and speed. And those direction and speed are being addressed in our base character. Or let me see. Oh, actually, it's being addressed in our animation blueprint. So that speed and direction, those are variables that we're using for our inputs, and the values of those variables are driving these values here. So if we look off to the side, we've got negative 180 to the left and 180 to the right, and then all the way up to 600. And that 600 is declared in the, I think that one actually is declared in here, because if we go into our class settings or default or class defaults, and we look up walk speed. Oh, right now it's 250, but I think maybe that's on this one. Where is it? Okay, class, that default walk. Oh, where? It's somewhere in here. But yeah, you have to say what that top number is. But essentially, these values are being driven by your controls. So there's a secondary component to this that's really important, that I think is really helping the blending that's going on, and that's specifically how ALS is handling. The system's really clever. Honestly, it's really clever. So we've set up this blend state, right? But what's really important is to get it to integrate with the ALS, you really have to work on the animations themselves. So let's see. Let's find one of these. Let's just go with the, what is this one? Walk VB front. So let's go into walk VB front. So if we go into here, we see that there's all these curves. So this is something that you'll set up as you go through a bunch of tutorials. But basically, these curves are a way to add information from the ALS animations and overlay it. And it's kind of like a blend. I think thinking of this as sort of a math equation was really helpful for me. All these joints, so like when we go into the skeleton, here, let me change this to, when we go into this skeleton, you see how all of these bones, they have this transform information. And these values are essentially what is telling this skeleton how to form. So as we move this stuff, like that, like let's pretend that you're just doing some animation where they're waving their hand. On a technical level, what you're doing is you're changing these values. You're changing these rotation and location values, right? So what I understand is happening, I think that these are in some way multipliers that are adding or subtracting the amount of overlay from this animation. So right now, the right arm is getting no additional modifiers. It's just pulling from the original animation. The right arm is getting 100% of its original animation. And as you go through here, you could really custom, like right here on the spine, I wanted 50% of the original animation spine, and I wanted 50% of the ALS animation spine. And then that way, and same with the spine and the pelvis, I wanted 100% of the original. And so with these curves, you can really sort of blend in the amount of sort of modified animation on top of the original animation. And that's really where a lot of that blend is happening. So if we go back into our blend space, let's find that blend space real quick. Is this it? Yeah. Cool. So if we look at these values and think of these animations and all these joints being, there's numeric values to each one of these joints and bones. And we can kind of see how that's broken down too when we look in the actual animation. Oh, I hate when that, it like, I wish I could, maybe I'll just make 2 windows, but, and we can see how that breaks down, right? So it is adding these values on top of arm. It's adding values on top of hand. It's adding value on top of legs and pelvis. And we can see that in our actual skeleton. So like if we go to pelvis, so that this bone essentially is getting a modified numeric value based on how you use this curve. And once again, like I wish I knew this 100%, but through playing around in tutorials, I've kind of come to understand a little bit about what's going on. And a lot of it has to do with these curves and adding a certain amount of overlay and added animation data on top. And that's kind of how a lot of that blending is going on specifically for locomotion. And then if we go into sort of the attack sequences, a lot of that is being triggered by this specific combat script. And if we go into, and it's a lot of back and forth, I've actually found that the use of those event dispatchers is super useful. So if we go into our graph, I have a specific combat input graph. And what this combat input graph is doing essentially is waiting for a certain physical like input from a mouse or controller. And when it does that, it fires off this function. And then these functions are attached to the actual combat script. And this is kind of where we're getting a lot of the animation triggering. So it's kind of function inception when you get down to it. So I have this switcher that's looking for an enumerator that tells me what type of attack is happening. So for the light sword, we are setting a damage amount, and then we're going into this function. And then this function is handling a lot of the animation stuff. So if, and then here's another switch, just to, I'm trying to make sure that I can do a lot later on. Like if I wanted a different mid attack or light attack based off of a different overlay state, I can set that up. So right now there's a little bit of room to scale, but for this example, we are going through the katana, and we're setting a state, and that's just because I really am trying to separate the AI from the playable character. But essentially what's going on here, and this was really cool too, setting this up is, I thought, a really nice idea. And And that is using an array of animations. And see, this is where I'm trying to set apart the AI from the playable character. So I'm looking for a character type, and the select is using different arrays of animations to decide whether or not to use the array of animations for Dawn or the array of animations for the AI. And this is where the animation montages become super helpful, because now when we go into this this array, it is looking for a slot for animation montages. So by making a bunch of different attack animation montages, you can actually set up a whole bunch of these. Right now I just have 2, and the reason for that is I can scale this as I go. So really, once again, a lot of this is to implement room for scaling. But essentially, I've got this little random int, and it's just looking for an index. It's saying 0 or 1. And of course, if there were 4 different array items, it would be 0 to 3. And it would be randomly looking for an int. And then that int is assigned to an index. And each one of these, as you can see, is specific to an index. And when that happens, we set the current montage to whatever was here. And then we play that montage. And inside of our anim instance. So that's specifically why I'm using the animation montages, because it works with the system that I have set up. That way I can really, really diversify and scale. And yeah, so that's kind of how I'm implementing animation montages. I'm trying to think. And then that same thing happens with, like equipping the weapon. So this is one of those instances where I really liked being able to use the camera manager. So when we equip the weapon, we actually do a little animation on the camera. And then we, of course, play that montage. And what's cool about this, once again, is by using a montage, we can do a little bit more refined logic. So there's this select deciding which montage to play, whether she's pulling out the sword or putting the sword back in. And that's feeding off of an index that basically I've been using that condition all over the place. But yeah, and that's really ultimately why I'm using montages. I can do a lot of logic with them, and there honestly there might be better ways to do it. I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I've found to work pretty well. Oh, another thing that's really important that I really should have talked about earlier is the slot for the animations. So if we go into one of the animation montages, let's go into let's just find one real quick. Let's do this one maybe. Yeah, so what's important to see, I'm going to just pause that. So besides these notifies, I think I talked a little bit about the notifies in one of the earlier ones. But what's really important is this default group, and this slot is named combat. And by doing this, you can do a whole lot of different slots that kind of let you, in a way, intersect the flow or the direction. I don't know what the exact word is, but basically override and sort of insert some animation. And we see that in our animation blueprint. If we go into, I believe it's the anim graph. Is this where we put that slot? Yes, perfect. So basically this you'll get really used to this too when you're setting up a lot of character stuff, these sort of poses that are going through, we are setting up a slot that can basically be identified, and that's that combat slot. So by creating another slot, in a way we're overriding, I think, and we're basically just anything that is using that slot will happen at this point, after the animation layer blending. So I think I'm not entirely sure if it really is overriding or if I'm just saying something silly, but by having a slot here, I mean, we could always create another slot, which I think I might do for like interaction animations. So like when Dawn picks stuff up, I think I might just end up doing another slot for that. So you just create a slot and then you can define that slot. Oh, that is the default one. We don't want the default one. I don't. Now I'm having to go way back. Do you make a slot here? Oh, yeah. You make a slot here, in the animation montage. So you make a new slot and then you name that there, and then you can find it here. But so that's kind of how you can intersect and add some animation into your ALS system. But once again, I hope this isn't viewed as a tutorial as much as it is kind of just like a recap of what I'm doing, because honestly, I needed tutorials to do this. This is just a really big system. Trying to think. Oh, I guess I can give just, this is a little outside of animations per se, and I can just give a little bit of preview as to the inventory system that I've been playing with, which has been fun. But I have started to set up an inventory system to where you can collect these different books and these crystals, and the crystals kind of act as like ammo for these magic texts. So you can equip these magic texts. Oh, wait. Oh, I think I have to recompile here. Where did that? Compile, save. Compile, save. Let's see if that works. And there we go. You can equip that, close that, and get these crystals. And then what's cool about this is to equip this book. You equip that book, and now it's kind of on your hip. And now when you're in Katana, you can do these super special attacks. And since we only had one crystal attached to the book, now, as we can see, there's not enough crystals. So we can go into our inventory and reload our book with the crystals that we have. So now we have 2 more, or 3 more. And now we can do that special attack again. So yeah, that's just kind of something I've been playing with, and that's just like a little preview. But I guess at this point, that's kind of the little lowdown of how I'm handling some of the stuff with ALS. And once again, there's tutorials on how to do animation montages and how to uh, really pull in your custom animations for ALS. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I integrated it. And I guess that's it for now.